Ariya broadens Nissan's EV range upmarket, an upper mid-sized coupe-crossover that really seems to have the want-one factor missing from so many family segment electric vehicles. The brand describes this car as a force of wonder, and for sure it's boldly styled and has a cutting-edge cabin. Plus, there's a choice of battery sizes and drivetrain options. Think EVs are dull? Check this one out.
Every major brand has been developing electric vehicles over the last decade, but only a few have been doing so with actual customers, selling cars from actual showrooms. One of these brands is Nissan, who established the concept of an all-electric family car with the innovative Leaf all the way back in 2011, before bringing us a follow-up, that difficult second album, this car, the Ariya. Much of that time was spent creating the platform this car sits upon, the CMF EV chassis, that also underpins its very similar close cousin, the Renault Megane E-Tech Electric. That car's positioned in size and price very similarly to the current-day Nissan Leaf. So this one, its name based on the Japanese word for honourable, must be a slightly larger, slightly more aspirational, more upmarket thing. A mid-sized crossover aimed at entry-level Tesla territory and the EV market's most overcrowded segment. This more exalted price point is foreign to Nissan, and it might be equally uncomfortable for the Ariya if all this model turns out to be is a slightly larger take on its Renault design cousin. So lots of promises are being made here about the Ariya representing a new chapter for the company and marking a fresh era for electric vehicles. The reality, of course, is that it obviously can't shake its segment up like the original Leaf did, but it'll certainly need to bring something a little different to the class if it's to stand out. The unusual styling seems to promise that. Nissan wants us to see it as a coupe SUV, and we're promised some unusual cabin design too. Whether the underlying technology can match all this tinsel is another question, of course. To discover the truth, you're going to need the industry's most comprehensive review, the Car and Driving Road Test. The idea here, says Nissan, is to amplify the fun-to-drive aspect of electric mobility. A heavy old EV, fun to drive? That might be a new concept for you. If so, Nissan wants to change your mind. Well, let's get comfortable and see what we have here. Well, it's all very minimalist, the only obvious control being this pulsing start button by your left knee. Press it and graphics on both displays ahead of you spring to life, ending with an ad for Nissan Intelligent Mobility on the left screen and two conventional-looking virtual gauges on the right one with a little green ready signal in the left-hand dial. Pull the little gear toggle on this raised centre console down into D or B, and you will indeed be ready. But for what? Initial feel is promising, the power delivery smooth and linear, the drive feeling solid and assured like that of a larger EV, which is interesting because this Ariya's CMF EV platform is primarily designed for smaller ones, like its cousin, the Renault Megane E-Tech Electric, which is why it's based around front-wheel drive in a class where EVs are usually propelled more maturely from the rear. Nissan, of course, doesn't explain it like that, contending that this car's front-driven in its lower-powered forms to make it more secure, stable and easy to drive. We'll see. You're also reminded of the class below by the size of the volume model's battery pack, 63 kilowatt-hours of usable capacity, in a class where 70 to 80 kilowatt-hour size battery packs are more common, which is unfortunate because it limits this Japanese contender in driving range, an area where buyers will have been hoping for a step forward. a 250-mile range figure for the volume front-driven 63 kilowatt-hour Ariya we're trying here might have seemed quite reasonable to development chief Makoto Fukada and his project team when this car was being developed. But in the cold, hard light of 2023, when the benchmark for this class has risen to well over 300 miles between charges, it looks distinctly behind the curve. And incidentally, not much of an advance over the 239-mile figure that the older generation 62 kilowatt-hour battery offers in Nissan's smaller Leaf E+. Advance these arguments to your dealer and they will be quick to point out that, unlike its Renault cousin, this car can be ordered with a bigger battery, 87 kilowatt hours in size, which boosts driving range up to a far more acceptable best possible figure of 329 miles in front-driven form. But that's a figure that, as we'll see in our cost of ownership section, quite a few obvious rivals will edge close to without the need for a substantial chunk of extra cash, which wasn't really what we were expecting given the potential efficiency benefits of the primary drive motor in use here. Nissan calls it electrically excited, which conjures up image of a toddler on a sugar rush, but actually refers to the way the rotors in the drive unit are driven by opposing magnetic fields, which relieves the motor of the need to contain heavy magnetic metals. Saving kilos ought to boost drive mileage, plus this design was supposed to make the Ariya more efficient at cruising speeds. The heavier 87 kilowatt-hour battery requires a slightly higher motor power output of 238 horsepower in the front-driven model, negated of course by the extra kilos, so the rest to 62 miles an hour figure in that version is actually a tenth slower at 7.6 seconds. To achieve this kind of acceleration, you'll need to ignore the full travel resistance from the throttle pedal and, of course, select the most sprightly of the three available drive modes, Sport, the other two being Standard and Eco. Mindful perhaps of the driving range issue we just covered, that probably isn't something a regular owner is likely to be doing very often. Unless perhaps they rather bravely elected to shell out serious coin on the most powerful of the three available Ariya drivetrains, the curiously titled E4-Horse setup, which adds a further motor on the rear axle, creating, as usual with this EV format, a nominal all-wheel drive system and considerably boosting total system output, in this case to 301 horsepower, with pulling power exactly doubling to 300 newton meters. The extra weight of the E-Force package does of course mandate the use of the larger 87 kilowatt-hour battery, but it doesn't stop this top Ariya feeling quite eager, 62 miles an hour from rest, dispatched in just 5.7 seconds, en route to a more modern era feeling top speed of 124 miles an hour. Driving range is up to 319 miles. In other markets, there's an uprated Performance E-Force variant with 389 horsepower that makes the 62 mile an hour benchmark in just 5.1 seconds. But at the time of filming, Nissan hadn't decided whether or not to offer that here. The Japanese brand is rather proud of the E-Horse layout, referring to it as the spiritual offspring of the clever Atessa ETS torque split system used in their late great GTR supercar. Technology the brand has combined with the traction of the intelligent 4x4 setup used in their old Patrol Go Anywhere large SUV. You won't feel a night and day difference with the E-Force on a trip round the block, but you'll be thankful for it in winter, a season for which an extra snow driving mode is provided for the all-wheel drive variant. The extra grip this will give in Arctic conditions will be very well worth having. Plus, in drier, more clement seasons, the E-Force system's extra tractional capability will reward the few prepared to brave the significant levels of hard cornering body roll and throw this Nissan about. A possible more likely reason for stretching to the E-Force version of this car would be to benefit from a towing capability that doubles over the front-driven variants to a useful 1,500 kilograms. On the subject of weight, there's plenty of it here, as is also the case with every rival. No one's yet figured out how to make an EV tipping the scales at up to 2.2 tonnes ride like a comparable combustion model weighing 700 kilos less. But quite a few obvious rivals, Skoda's Enyaq iV springs to mind, make a better fist of it than this. We'd hope for more, given that this car's CMF EV platform was referred to at launch as a magic flying carpet by Nissan insiders, and indeed initial impressions are of quite a serene demeanour. Really poor surfaces, though, it turns out, are covered with about as much subtlety as a tin tray tobogganing down a bumpy slope. And speed humps send a shudder through the cabin. That's not unusual in this class, but some rivals, notably the Volkswagen Group ones, are able to mask it a little by offering the kind of optional adaptive damping system that Nissan hasn't thought necessary to include here. Having made all these observations, you probably won't be too surprised that we've ended up questioning whether the amplified fun to drive mantra this car started off promising is much in evidence here. Little chinks of it break through in some areas though. Steering feel and feedback, for instance, is possibly best in class, and the provided e-pedal brake regeneration system works well when you're pushing on, slowing the car noticeably for more confidence at speed on corner entry, as would be the case if you changed down a gear to take a turn at speed, as you might when driving hard in a combustion engined model. It's a pity though that no steering wheel paddles or screen settings are provided to vary brake regeneration harvesting, the sort of thing offered by quite a few obvious rivals. Still, the e-pedal system is certainly effective when activated, slowing the car by so much, up to 2.2 G, that the brake lights flash. Get familiar with that, and as we have, you'll probably end up activating it all the time. We also really like Nissan's Pro Pilot autonomous driving aid package, all of it standard. It keeps you centred in your lane and links with the navigation system to anticipate what's ahead, reacting to speed limit changes and adjusting drive accordingly, while smoothly sensing different topography. A highway exit slip road, for instance, automatically slowing the car down and always keeping you in the centre of the curve. Few similar systems work better than this. With plusher trim, there's also a Pro Pilot Park setup that'll slot the car into spaces for you, though unlike the similar system on this car's Korean rivals, it can't be operated remotely from outside the car by the key fob. Perhaps we'll get that kind of functionality when this car is facelifted, but as part of that project, we suggest that there are a few more pressing issues for the brand to attend to. In the meantime, though there's a lot here you might like, this is very much a work in progress. Nissan, like most of its rivals, has used the dawn of this new EV era to embrace a fresh design philosophy. This one's called Timeless Japanese Futurism and is supposed to be sleek, sexy and seamless. Well, it's certainly different. And the profile perspective is certainly sleek, with a sweeping silhouette that the brand insists justifies classification as a coupe SUV. Design director Giovanni Aroba and his team wanted the low, sleek profile to give the feeling that the Ariya was constantly slicing through the air. There are very few panelwork creases, just this single, uninterrupted so-called horizon mid-level line that flows through the charging flap and above the door handles. The charging flap, situated in the nose on a leaf, here moves to the front wing and is mirror converted, so will always be on the curb side when you parallel park. Wheel rims, which ought to be small on an efficiency-orientated EV, but in the fashion-conscious crossover segment, are nearly always big, conform to trend, being 19 or 20 inches in size. Various two-tone paint combinations will be particularly favoured. Also, perhaps the signature Akatsui copper paintwork we have here. The front end treatment is striking, apparently chosen to embrace the Japanese term iki, which is supposed to describe this Nissan's chic, cutting-edge nature. Where on a combustion model you'd have a grille, here in this dark centre section, we've got an aerodynamic shield which incorporates a 3D traditional Japanese kumiko pattern just under its smooth surface, which looks more like tyre tread, and covers the sensing equipment used for the car's Pro Pilot features. The shield's upper section has the brand's latest logo, and the thin LED headlamps, constructed with 420mm mini projectors, are combined with narrow turn signal strips that aim to reinvent Nissan's previous signature V-motion design philosophy. The rear is a little less memorable, characterised by steeply raked C-pillar that blends into the deck. A one-piece light blade spans the width of the tail section, giving a blackout effect when parked and consistent red illumination when in use. This rear arch flare and lower diffuser-like section both add a sporting touch, but whether this accentuated roof wing is really needed on an EV that in its base form only just about manages to reach a 3-figure top speed is perhaps debatable. Of course, as usual, what's more important is what you can't see. The CMF EV platform the Nissan-Renault alliance has developed for all its most imminent forthcoming EVs. A chassis this car shares with its close cousin, the Renault Megane E-Tech Electric. Right, enough on the outside. Nissan is one of those brands that thinks an EV should look and feel futuristic from every perspective. We saw that with the Leaf. Will the same be true in here? Yes, of course it is. Nissan thinks this is what a sleek cafe lounge on a Starship would look like. Really? For sure, it reimagines what the cabin of an EV in this class ought to be, with a theme apparently inspired by the Japanese term ma, which is supposed to refer to spatio-temporal openings. It's certainly a very minimalist vibe, emphasised by what initially appears to be an almost total absence of buttons. Haptic touch switches instead lie shielded behind wood grain style surfacing until activating the starter switch illuminates them. There's no need for a centre stack in an EV, nor does this raised centre console between the seats intrude too far forward into this lovely open-plan, thick pile carpeted space beneath the dash. An illuminated lower fretwork panel emphasises this, the same decoration extending into the beautifully stitched door cards. In case you needed any more distinctive EV cues, there's a copper-coloured strip highlighting the narrow vents that extend across the fascia's entire width. And Nissan's managed to design the best-looking two-spoke steering wheel we've yet seen. Plus, there's subtle ambient lighting apparently inspired by traditional Japanese lanterns. And the so-called zero-gravity slim-profile seats are stitched with part leather upholstery that isn't too obviously vegan. On the plusher Evolve variant, there's also a bit of kumiko cleverness with a rather unnecessary power sliding feature for this centre console and a rather more useful compartment that electrically extends from the middle of the dash below the aircon controls, incorporating a table on which you could put, for example, a laptop so you can do some work while waiting for your car to charge. Talking of media connectivity, well, that's covered off by the expected twin screens, which, as with the current trend, come bonded together in one horizontal plane and are each 12.3 inches in size, orientated in a wave-like shape. That makes this instrument display over twice the size of the one you get in rival Volkswagen Group EVs. But unfortunately, Nissan hasn't capitalised on this advantage by offering full-screen GPS mapping in your direct eye line. Only 2 layout formats are offered, with or without these conventional-looking virtual dials. Stick with the round gauges and you'll find speed on the right and a percentage power meter on the left. The latter flitting a little distractingly between outer bars that illuminate in either white or blue, depending on where you're using energy or regenerating it. Just about anything else you might need to know is, of course, covered off by this accompanying central infotainment monitor. This has a vertical right-hand menu bar with home, nav, audio, phone and climate shortcut options on it. The latter, ventilation functions supplemented by the separated dark until activated lower haptic buttons we referenced earlier, which inevitably aren't as user-friendly as traditional buttons, a few of which remain out of sight by your right knee. The centre display follows the current infotainment trend for split-screen formats made up of customisable widgets. Here we've got a nav map accompanied by separate charging and audio sections. Swipe left for all kinds of other widget display options, phone, apps, Nissan Connect services, energy usage and a useful map showing how far you can drive on the battery's current charge. All of the expected connectivity features appear, of course, with Amazon Alexa, Google integration and the usual over-the-air updates to keep it all current, though there are a few things Nissan could work on. The smartphone mirroring system only works wirelessly with Apple CarPlay, so Android Auto folk will still be fiddling with unsightly wires. This standard model 6-speaker audio system lacks a bit of punch. The 10-speaker Bose system on the plusher Evolve variants vastly better, and the hybrid voice recognition system is unable to do something as simple as finding a preferred radio station. The navigation system's effective though, incorporating an intelligent route planner that calculates the best route based on various real-time factors such as traffic, road conditions, charging station availability and remaining battery charge. What else? Well, the ergonomics aren't bad, though the central armrest is unfortunately sited higher than the one on the door, which can lead to a slightly crooked driving position if you like to use them both at the same time. But there are lots of positives. The little gear shifter neatly fits into the palm of your hand, and the plusher Evolve model includes one of the biggest head-up displays in the segment. If you've opted for that pricier trim level, using the helpful Nissan Connect app, you can preset the position of the front seats, the steering wheel, and even the sliding centre console to your preference before even entering the car. And on all Arias, those thin seats are quite supportive, include powered lumbar adjustment and position you fairly high and commandingly. All-round visibility isn't bad as a result, though you might need the 360-degree bird's eye view camera and all-round sensors for some tricky parking manoeuvres because of the vast C-pillars. Cabin storage solutions are reasonable. The door pockets have incorporated bottle holders and are bigger than they look. The glove box isn't, but at least unlike most of its rivals, Nissan hasn't forgotten an overhead sunglasses compartment. This centre console has covered twin cup holders, but the lidded storage area behind them hasn't room for anything much more than the standard fitted wireless phone charger. It's pretty hard to get at the lower part of this middle console, which has a deep, narrow cubby, a 12-volt socket and both USB-A and USB-C ports. There are ticket clips in both sun visors, and finally, make sure you don't climb out of the car key in pocket with the Ariya system still fired up, because if you do, the electronics get confused and you have to reintroduce the car to its key via a rather long-winded process. Right, let's take a look at rear seat space, which will presumably be important to you if you're looking for an upper mid-sized EV crossover like this. Otherwise, you might as well have saved your money and gone for something sized closer to a Nissan Leaf, or more likely perhaps the Renault Megane E-Tech electric close cousin model we mentioned earlier. That Renault is 385mm shorter than this Nissan, but more significantly has 90mm less wheelbase length, which Nissan hopes you'll agree will make a big difference once you get inside. So let's see. These days, you'd be disappointed in any full battery vehicle of this size with a bespoke designed EV platform if rear legroom wasn't vast. And the Ariya doesn't disappoint, with 780mm of stretch-out space. But that swept-back coupe SUV silhouette we mentioned earlier means predictably that folk over 6 foot tall are going to be sitting with their heads pretty close to the ceiling, especially if, as here, your Ariya comes with a vast twin-pane panoramic glass roof that actually opens and is optional with this base advanced trim. The 930mm rear headroom provision should be fine for most adults though. If you choose to do without this glass top, we'd recommend you consider the optional but slightly impractical light grey upholstery option, because otherwise the combination of this dark upholstery, rear privacy glass and these huge rear C-pillars might make things a touch claustrophobic back here. Given the huge battery pack beneath the floor, you probably wouldn't expect this seat base to slide as it might in a comparably sized combustion engine crossover, but quite a few EVs in this class have managed to make their rear backrests recline, and this is one of them, though the reclining angle isn't very great. As usual, of course, in an EV, there's no centre tunnel, so a middle adult occupant can be quite easily accommodated, and of course, far more comfortably than would be the case with that smaller Renault model we just mentioned. If you've a top Evolve model, the electrically sliding centre console we mentioned earlier can be eased forward to further improve the centre person's knee space. It's disappointing though that the twin vents provided in the middle back here can't work with the separate tri-zone climate controls that quite a few rivals offer, but brownie points are regained with the provision of both USB-A and USB-C ports for game-obsessed young folk. There are overhead reading lights, bottle holders in the doors, storage pockets in the seat backs, coat hooks reside in the grab handles, and there are the usual twin cup holders in this fold-out armrest. Right, let's finish with a look at the boot. Now, rather disappointingly for an electric vehicle with a supposedly bespoke EV platform, everything has to go in here because, unlike with some rivals, there's no extra frunk space beneath the bonnet. Nissan having filled that with packaging for the heating, ventilation and air conditioning system. Anyway, the standard powered tailgate rises to reveal a 466-litre space, or at least it does on a front-driven variant like this one. The extra rear axle motor required by the E-Force all-wheel drive models means a drop in capacity to 408 litres. This front-driven model's capacity isn't one of the largest in the segment. A Kia EV6, for instance, offers 490 litres. This Nissan's trunk, though, is of a good square shape that swallows a surprising amount, which is why up to 8 carry-on suitcases will fit, compared to 7 in the Kia. You do far better, though, if cargo capacity was a priority by opting for a Skoda Enyaq iV, which takes up to 585 litres. Interestingly, the Renault Megane E-Tech partner model we mentioned earlier, though a significantly smaller car, has a boot that's just 26 litres smaller than that of this Ariya. What you'll like most about this trunk area is the twin luggage board arrangement we've seen on more conventional Nissans, which sees the nearer board able to be placed vertically, so easily dividing the load area. There are 2 deep recesses either side, each big enough to hold a charging lead if you've taken the trouble to bag it up like this. A 12-volt socket is missing, but there are 4 tie-downs, 2 bag hooks and lights on both sides. There's no space for a spare wheel of any kind though. So, as with most EVs, if you get a puncture, you're going to be stuck at the side of the road with an inflation kit. Unfortunately, there's no useful 40-20-40 rear seatback split, nor has Nissan provided a ski hatch, so longer items can't be pushed forward between 2 rear-seated passengers. At least when the 60-40 split backrest folds, it falls almost flat, freeing up as much as 1,780mm of load length and up to 850mm of loading height. Boot capacity with the seats folded is 1,350 litres with this front-driven version, or 1,290 with the E-Force models. It's a pretty straightforward model lineup, 2 battery options, 2 drivetrain packages and 2 trim variants. You can mix and match between almost all of them depending on what you want and how much you have to spend. Ariya pricing starts way beyond the point where that of Nissan's top Leaf E-Plus models finish, which means a price structure that starts from around £46,000 for the entry-level Advance 63 kilowatt-hour 214 HP version we have here, or around £52,000 if you want the same car in 238 HP form with a larger 87 kilowatt-hour battery. Advanced spec with that larger battery, e-Force all-wheel drive and 301 horsepower costs just under £55,000. If your preference is for plusher Evolve trim, then your Ariya in 63 kilowatt-hour battery form will cost from around £50,000 or from around £56,000 with the larger 83 kilowatt-hour battery. Evolve spec with that larger battery and e-Force all-wheel drive costs just under £59,000. All the prices we've just given were correct at the time of this test in early 2023. Given the inflationary nature of EV pricing just at present, who knows what they'll be pitched at by the time you come to view this film. Still, thanks to the quite encouraging predicted residual values we'll tell you more about in our cost section, Nissan's monthly finance rates are very competitive. As we filmed, starting from £629 monthly on the expected best-selling Evolve 87 kilowatt-hour version, with 5.81% APR and £6,616 customer deposit over 37 months with 10,000 miles of annual mileage. Unlike other reviews that lazily quote prices without any kind of segment value perspective, we take the time in these films to survey the sector and tell you how the value of each car we test really stacks up. But before doing so, we'd encourage you to ask yourself whether you really do need an upper mid-range EV than a more conventional mid-range one, or to put it another way, an Ariya-sized model of this sort rather than a Leaf-sized one. That's a particularly pertinent question here because if you're looking at a base 63 kilowatt-hour Ariya like this one, virtually all of the same engineering can be had in a Renault Megane E-Tech Electric costing from £37,000. Yes, that Renault is a more compact car, 385mm shorter to be exact, but its boot is just 26 litres smaller. If you can cope with that difference, even the ritziest version of that Megane will save you around £4,000 on the most spartanly furnished version of this Nissan. If you're able to live with a Megane-sized model rather than an Ariya-sized one, we'd also suggest you consider a car you might find on the other side of your Nissan dealer's showroom. The clever e-Power version of the brand's familiar Qashqai family crossover. This isn't an EV, more a kind of hybrid, though it can't be plugged in. It is a bit like an EV, though, in that the engine, 1.5 litres in size, never actually drives the wheels. Its role instead being to power a front-mounted motor that propels the car along. As we filmed, Qashqai e-Power pricing started from around £33,500, so about £12,500 less than the cheapest Ariya. But, like that Megane, it's really more of an alternative to that more compact Nissan Leaf EV we mentioned earlier, which in its largest battery E-Plus guise prices in the same kind of bracket. All of which is interesting and, we would argue, relevant to the purchasing decision, but we're not really here to talk about alternatives in the class below the one in which this Ariya competes, so let's get on and give you some guidance in comparing like with like. The EVs in this segment, the Ariya really is targeted against. If you're wanting a battery over 60 kilowatt hours in size, then this Nissan's £46,000 price starting point is where entry-level versions of an awful lot of rivals also start, by which we mean cars like rear-driven versions of Tesla's Model Y, Kia's EV6, Hyundai's Ioniq 5, Toyota's BZ4X, the Polestar 2, the Volvo C40, and 77 kilowatt-hour versions of the Skoda Enyaq iV and the Volkswagen ID4. A rear-driven Tesla Model 3 or a base Mercedes EQA 250 Plus wouldn't save you much at this price point either. But you'd need around £5,000 more for a base Ford Mustang Mach-E, BMW i4 or Audi Q4 40 e-tron, or around £10,000 more for a base Genesis GV60. Where this Ariya hits problems, though, in this base 63 kilowatt-hour form is with its 223-mile EV driving range. Nearly all the rivals just quoted have a driving range well into the 300s, and for that, as we suggested earlier, you'll need to pay Nissan nearly £6,000 more for a larger 87 kilowatt-hour battery. A slightly different set of rivals meet the Ariya when ordered in E-Force all-wheel drive form, which, guys, you have to have the larger 87 kilowatt-hour battery. As we said earlier, the starting price for this Nissan in that form is around £55,000. And as we filmed, most opposition models with all-wheel drive and similar power outputs were all grouped around the £50,000 price point, which means all-wheel driven versions of models like BMW's iX1, Subaru Solterra, Tesla's Model 3, Volkswagen's ID4, Skoda's Enyaq iV, Hyundai's Ioniq 5, Kia's EV6 and Toyota's BZ4X. Dual motor versions of the Tesla Model Y, the Mercedes EQA and the Pulsar 2 undercut an Ariya E-Force by a couple of thousand, and you'd need only a couple of thousand more than Nissan asks for an E-Force to get yourself a base spec all-wheel drive Audi Q5 50 e-tron or Genesis GV60. Ultimately, of course, it all comes down to the deal you're offered. And since most EVs are bought on leasing and PCP schemes, you could argue with some justification that monthly finance costs are a far better parameter of value these days than outright purchase figures. As we said earlier, the Ariya stacks up well in this area, so if you're convinced by that, then you'll be wanting to know just how generous Nissan has been with standard spec. So let's take a closer look at that now. We'll start with features common to all Ariya models. As you'd expect in this day and age, LED tech characterises the headlights, the tail lamps and the front fog lights. You get big 19-inch wheels with aero covers, and the glass is of the Super UV infrared cut variety and is rear privacy shaded. Plus, you get a heated front windscreen, power folding mirrors, rain sensing wipers, a powered tailgate and an alarm. In addition, there are sport, normal and eco drive modes, and E-Force all-wheel drive versions get an extra snow setting as well. In addition, all Ariyas feature an e-pedal system that allows you to do most of your driving with just the accelerator. And all variants include a wide range of camera safety features, which we'll cover for you in a few moments' time. Plus, Nissan throws in a heat pump, which will keep driving range optimal in really cold weather. And that's a feature some other brands charge a lot more for. As always, of course, with an EV, there's an app so that you can preset the climate system, access remote interactive services, and schedule home charging from your smartphone. In this case, it's called the Nissan Connect Services app. For manoeuvring, you get all-round parking sensors and an around view monitor with moving object detection. This provides a virtual 360-degree bird's eye view graphic, which alerts you if you're about to come close to static or moving objects, say a post, a pet, or more seriously, a child. Should that warning be ignored, a rear automatic braking system will stop the car automatically. Semi-autonomous driving kit includes intelligent cruise control, which works not only with an adjustable speed limiter, but also with Nissan's well-proven ProPilot Assist system, which can virtually take over driving for you at cruising speeds. An incorporated traffic jam pilot system does the same thing in stop-start traffic queues, so the car will take the strain out of the morning commute. Inside every Ariya, there's a 12.3-inch instrument screen, automatic dual-zone climate control, a wireless phone charger, a plasma cluster iron air purifier, and LED ambient lighting. There's also heat for the front seats and steering wheel, and the driver's chair gets powered lumbar support. For the boot, Nissan also includes its clever twin luggage board system and a powered tailgate. The 12.3-inch central infotainment screen includes over-the-air updates, 4G connectivity and navigation with an intelligent route planner. Plus, there's smartphone mirroring, which is wireless with Apple CarPlay and cabled with Android Auto. There's also a virtual personal assistant voice control system, which works with Google Assistant, is integrated with Amazon Alexa, and responds to the command "Hello Nissan" or "Hey Nissan." If you can stretch from this advanced grade to plusher Evolve spec, the kit quota ramps up considerably, of course. There's a huge twin-paned electric panorama sunroof, and in place of the fabric and synthetic leather upholstery used on the advanced version, you get seats that instead mix the synthetic leather with ultra suede inserts. At Evolve level, Nissan also adds adaptive beam assist for the headlights and sequential turning lights, plus a 10-speaker Bose audio system upgrade and a ProPilot Park system that will take over steering, accelerator and brakes as it slots your Ariya automatically into bays and parallel spaces. Other niceties include a head-up display, powered steering wheel adjustment, and 2 cabin features the brand is particularly pleased with: a power sliding centre console and a clever power centre storage feature with a table. There's also an intelligent rear view mirror, which allows you to digitally see what's happening behind the car thanks to a built-in LCD monitor in the central mirror panel. Evolve spec Ariyas also get extra interior illumination, heated rear seats and memory functions for the door mirrors, seats, steering wheel and infotainment settings. On to options. Now, there are front and rear styling plates if you want to make the car stand out a little more, and you can add welcome lights, exclusive floor mats and premium kick plates for the door sills. If you don't like the cabin's rather sombre vibe, you can swap the black upholstery for a less practical light grey shade. And with top Evolve spec, you can add upholstery partly trimmed in blue Napa leather of the real variety. Many owners will want to add the roof crossbars that will allow them to fit a roof box, a roof-mounted bike carrier and a ski carrier. And for the boot, you can add a luggage entry guard, a reversible trunk liner, in-car carrier bars that will better allow you to separate out the cargo bay, and full trunk protection, including a mat that folds forward to protect the bumper. Nissan will also sell you an AC home wall box charger, and you can also fit a tow bar, not always a given with an EV, though you probably won't be doing that with a front-driven version like this one because it can only tug along up to 750 kilos. As usual these days, most of the available colours cost extra, and your dealer will be trying to persuade you to choose one of the 2-tone combinations which feature a pearl black roof. We've got that here, as you can see, matched to Akatsuki copper paintwork imagined especially for the Ariya, a shade Nissan tells us is a colour supposed to express the moment just before dawn as the sun marks the beginning of a new day. The colour also apparently referencing conductivity and the dawn of the new automotive era. The pearl black roof is also available with 3 other body shades: warm silver, burgundy and white pearl. And whatever your preference, there's the option of larger 20-inch wheels if you want them. On to safety. Now, all Ariyas get Nissan's latest suite of Safety Shield camera safety equipment, and the front grille houses a whole range of sensors that drive the brand's ProPilot driver assistance systems. There's a lot here, so let's try and guide you through it. You'd expect an advanced autonomous braking system on a car of this sort these days. And sure enough, this intelligent emergency braking setup obliges, recognising pedestrians and cyclists and incorporating junction assist so that the brakes will also be automatically applied if you dangerously turn out in front of another vehicle at an intersection. It also incorporates intelligent forward collision warning, a setup that detects a braking car 2 vehicles ahead, prevent multi-car accidents by raising an alert, and if necessary, automatically applying the brakes. There's also intelligent blind spot intervention, which will warn you if there's traffic in the blind spots diagonally behind the rear of the car, and if necessary, will apply corrective braking to bring the vehicle back into lane if you attempt to move into the path of a detected vehicle. There are intelligent lane keep assist and intelligent lane intervention systems to keep you in lane, and you get an intelligent driver alertness feature to keep you awake. There's traffic sign recognition, and high beam assist is provided to automatically dip your headlights for you at night. Plus, rear cross traffic alert warns you of oncoming vehicles when you're reversing out of a space. It's all very reassuring. Nissan's got quite a history of producing EVs, but the truth is that the brand has never been much noted for delivering full electric models with particularly long driving ranges. It's probably a bit unfair to note that the original Leaf back in 2011 could only go a claimed 110 miles between charges. The real-world reality was about 80, but battery technology was much less advanced back then. It's more pertinent to note that at the time of filming in early 2023, the volume 39 kilowatt-hour version of the brand's best-selling EV, the Leaf, could only take you a rather feeble 168 miles between charges, less than most EV super minis from the class below. Given that the Ariya is the first EV the brand has brought us since the second generation Leaf arrived back in 2017, we'd hoped for a big step forward in this area. But as you'll already know if you viewed our driving section, that hasn't really materialised. The base front-driven 63 kilowatt-hour version we're driving here manages a best of 250 miles between charges. And that's only if you stick with this test car's most affordable advanced trim level. It's 247 miles with plusher Evolve trim. At least the stated figure isn't a fantasy one. We've managed around 235 miles in this test, averaging about 3.7 miles per kilowatt hour consumption. Better class rivals are over 4 miles per kilowatt hour. So it's no surprise that the range figure we just quoted you is a fair bit adrift, even of the tail-end runners in this class. A Ford Mustang Mach-E standard range, 273 miles, and surprisingly the rear-driven version of Tesla's Model Y at 267 miles. The better class standard is mostly over 300. A comparably priced Skoda Enyaq iV80, for instance, manages up to 339 miles. You won't even get that if you stump up for an Ariya with the larger 87 kilowatt-hour battery. That model's front-driven rated at 329 miles in advanced form or 322 miles in Evolve form. An 87 kilowatt-hour Ariya with E-Force all-wheel drive manages up to 319 miles in advanced form or 314 miles in Evolve form. Again, some class perspectives needed. A base dual motor all-wheel drive Polestar 2 these days will take you up to 368 miles between charges. With a base dual motor all-wheel drive Tesla Model 3, it'd be up to 374. So, Nissan's got some catching up to do. The 130 kilowatt charging speed is reasonably class competitive though, on a par with rivals from Volkswagen, Skoda and Toyota, who, like this Nissan, persist with a conventional 400 volt electrical architecture for their EVs. Hyundai Motor Group contenders in this class, like the Kia EV6, the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and the Genesis GV60, use a more modern 800 volt system which enables those cars to charge at up to 233 kilowatts, but only at ultra rapid chargers that currently are rarer than hen's teeth in our market. So this Ariya's charging speed at a normal rapid charger should be fine for most folk. That's 31 minutes to charge from 10 to 80% for this 63 kilowatt hour model, which has a rather small 7.4 kilowatt onboard charger. Hooked up to a 7.4 kilowatt garage wall box, you'll need 10 hours. With the bigger batteried 87 kilowatt hour models, it'd be 10 to 80% in 35 minutes from a rapid public charger, or 14 hours from a 7.4 kilowatt wall box. A nice touch is the inclusion of an LED inspection light in the car's charging point, so that owners won't have to rely on street lighting to connect their cars to an electric source at night. That charging point is thankfully a modern CCS plug rather than the Leaf's outdated CHAdeMO socket. Nissan has partnered with Eon Drive and PodPoint to offer simple financing options for home wallbox installations. Out on the road, you'll only approach the range figures given earlier if you keep the car in its most frugal eco driving mode and permanently engage both the B drive setting and the E-pedal max brake regeneration feature. The E-Force variants have rear motor braking too, so can harvest even more energy back to the battery off throttle or when you're slowing down. The left-hand instrument gauge shows miles per kilowatt consumption, and there's a selectable eco setting screen on the instrument panel display that can graphically show your recent efforts at frugality or otherwise. On the centre monitor, you can also select a useful map showing how far you can drive on the battery's current charge. Like all EVs, you'll be benefit in kind tax rated at just 2% based on this full battery model's supposed zero emission status, which of course, unless you're drawing from solar power, is a tag that no EV can ever really justify. The coal-fired energy generation environmental cost of the electricity this Nissan consumes is better illustrated by an actual CO2 figure of about 31 grams per kilometre. What else? Well, as with every EV, you'll be free of congestion charging and road tax, but only until 2025. And as we mentioned in our market section, predicted residual values are quite encouraging. A 57% forecast over 3 years and 36,000 miles for an advanced version like this, or 56% over the same period for plusher Evolve trim. That's an improvement on what you get from most obvious rivals. A Skoda Enyaq iV would retain around 52% over the same period, while with a Hyundai Ioniq 5 it'd be around 54%. The warranty is a conventional 3-year or 60,000 mile affair, which is some way behind the 5 and 7-year coverage packages, respectively offered by Hyundai and Kia in this segment, or the package of up to 10 years promised by Toyota. The battery of this Ariya is covered by a separate 8-year or 100,000 mile policy. Servicing is every year or 18,000 miles, whichever comes first, so you'll save a bit on that compared to a combustion engined model. And Nissan offers an enhanced servicing plan, which can be had with either 2, 3 or 4-year packages. Customers can make a single payment or pay with flexible instalments starting from around £20 a month. What you gain in lower servicing charges, though, you'll probably lose again when it comes to insurance costs. Brokers still terrified of the heavy collision potential accident costs of EVs. The Ariya is rated at Group 30A for a base 63 kilowatt-hour advanced model like this. It's 31A for the same car with plusher Evolve trim. For an Ariya model with the larger 87 kilowatt-hour battery and front-wheel drive, it'd be Group 34A or Group 41A with an E-Force all-wheel drive. An Ariya 87 kilowatt-hour E-Force performance model would be Group 43A. To give you some segment perspective, that's about the same as you'd pay to insure a rival Hyundai Ioniq 5, but a little more that you'd pay to cover rivals like Volkswagen's ID4 and Skoda's Enyaq iV. There's no doubt the Ariya is a massive step forward for Nissan. The problem for this brand, though, is that every one of its rivals have made almost similarly seismic and well-funded improvements in order to move into the EV era. Having kicked the whole thing off with the Leaf back in 2011, you might have expected this Japanese manufacturer to use this follow-up design to set another significant benchmark for competitors to strive after, perhaps in driving range, charging speed, cabin space, or value. None of those areas are advanced here. Indeed, the Ariya struggles to compete in some of them, notably driving range, which is a pity because there's lots to like about this car. Striking looks, some clever cabin touches, and a classy vibe, positioning this model as a more expensive thing than it actually is. All of which, were it price positioned directly against its only slightly smaller and very similarly engineered Renault Megane E-Tech electric close cousin, would probably guarantee sales success. Add around £9,000 to that car's price though, as this Nissan does, and the case is less clearly cut. This would have been an outstanding follow-up to the Leaf if it had arrived in showrooms just before the pandemic. But in the here and now of this test in early 2023, with other cars just beginning to reach the roads in significant numbers, we're left feeling that the Ariya needs to quickly evolve if it's to keep pace in a fast-moving segment. The fundamentals, though, are undoubtedly here for a very appealing family EV, and no brand's better placed than Nissan to deliver on that promise.